Okay, today we're going to do chapter 1, lesson 2, adding integers. Our essential question is the sum of two integers positive, negative, or 0, and how can you tell? So we're going to start off with two vocabulary terms. The first one is opposites. Opposites are a positive number and a negative number. For example, I might say the opposite of 2 is negative 2. Or the opposite of negative 10 is positive 10. So 2 and negative 2 are opposites, and negative 10 and positive 10 are opposites. Second vocabulary term, additive inverse. When you add, notice you see the word add in the word additive, a number and its opposite, you will always get 0. So for example, if I did 4 plus negative 4, and I put parentheses around that so that my addition sign and my negative sign aren't right next to each other. 4 plus negative 4, so thinking about that on a number line, if I start at positive 4 and I'm adding a negative, when you add a negative, it's going to take you to the left. So I'm going to go to the left 4 units, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. I'm starting here, and I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4 units to the left, which takes me back to 0. Therefore, 4 plus negative 4 is 0. And that will work for any additive inverse. When you add a number and its opposite, you will always get 0 as your answer. Our first key idea, adding integers with the same sign. So it says to add the absolute values of the integers and then use the common sign. The rule that I like to use for adding integers with the same sign is just add the numbers. You can ignore the signs at first. Add the numbers that you see. Then just keep the signs. So a positive plus a positive is a positive, and a negative plus a negative is a negative. Add the numbers and keep the sign. And then we'll put that in there as well. Positive plus a positive equals a positive, and a negative plus a negative equals a negative. So for example, in example 1, we are adding negative 2 plus negative 4. So I'm going to add 2 plus 4 is 6, and I'm going to keep the sign. A negative and a negative is going to give me a negative answer, negative 6. If I want to look at that on a number line, here's my negative 2 that I'm going to start. I'm adding a negative, so I should be going to the left on my number line. So negative 2, negative 3, negative 4, negative 5, and negative 6. I'm starting here. I'm going to go 4 units to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, and you can see me ending up at negative 6, which we said was the answer. All right, so we're adding the two numbers and keeping the sign. I'm going to ask you to pause the video now and see if you can do the on your own problems. And when you're done, hit play again, and you can come back and check your work. So in number 1, you're adding a positive and a positive. 7 plus 13, you don't even have to think about that. At this point, we should know that 7 plus 13 is 20. We're adding two positives, therefore my answer is positive 20. In number 2, we're adding two negatives. 8 and 5, I'm going to put together, and since they were negatives, my answer is going to be negative. 8 plus 5 is 12, therefore negative 8 plus negative 5 is a negative 12. I'm sorry, 13. I apologize. All right, negative plus a negative is a negative. And then in number 3, we've got negative 20 plus negative 15. I know that 20 plus 15 is 35, and since it's a negative plus a negative, my answer will be a negative 35. And then feel free to check it on the number line if you feel like you want to do that as well. All right, moving on to the next example, we're going to follow a new key idea, which is adding integers with different signs. It says to subtract the lesser absolute value from the greater absolute value, then use the sign of the integer with the greater absolute value. So what I like to say for this one is we are going to subtract the numbers And they say subtract the lesser absolute value from the greater absolute value. So ignoring the signs, just think of those numbers as you're going to subtract starting with the bigger number if you're ignoring the signs. Subtract the numbers and take the sign of the higher absolute value. And remember, absolute value is always positive because we're talking about its distance from 0. And we'll do some examples of that. But before, just to remind you, when we see that additive inverse, the sum of an integer and its additive inverse, which is also known as opposite, when you add its opposite, you always get 0. So be on the lookout for those as well. In example 2, we're adding with different signs now. So I want to subtract the numbers. So if I'm thinking 5 plus negative 10, my signs are different. I'm going to subtract the two numbers. So I'm going to ignore the signs for a second. I know that 10 minus 5, notice that I started with the bigger number, is 5. And now I'm going to look at their absolute values. The absolute value of 5 is 5. The absolute value of negative 10 is 10. Since 10 is greater than 5, its absolute value is greater than that one, then we're going to take the sign of that number. So we're going to take the sign of 10, and if you look, the sign of 10 is negative. Therefore, my answer needs to be negative. So 5 plus negative 10 is negative 5. In part B, negative 3 plus 7, I'm adding and the signs are different. Therefore, I'm really subtracting, starting with the bigger number, ignoring my signs. 7 minus 3 is 4. Now I've got to figure out what sign my 4 is. The absolute value of negative 3 is 3. The absolute value of 7 is 7. Since 7 is greater than 3, I'm going to take the sign of 7. If it doesn't have a sign, we know that it's positive, so I don't have to write anything for that 4 because the answer is positive 4. And in part C, I immediately recognize that negative 12 and 12 are opposites, and I'm adding them, and since I'm adding opposites, I'm really doing the additive inverse property, which means my answer is 0. In example 3, it says the list shows 4 bank account transactions in July. Find the change C in the account balances. So if you notice, we have 2 different transactions happening. We have a withdrawal, which means money's being taken out. So notice that that is a negative integer. And then we have a deposit. And a deposit is when we put money into our account. So notice that that is a positive number. So to find the sum, we're adding both positives and negatives. I would start by adding the numbers with the same signs. That makes it a little bit easier. So I'm going to add negative 40 and negative 50 because they have the same sign. And then I'm going to add 50 and 75 because they have the same sign. And then I'll take those two answers and add them together. So negative 40 plus negative 50, and I'm putting it in parentheses. Sorry, I want to make that a little bit clearer. I'm going to put it in parentheses so that my addition sign and my negative sign are not right next to each other. Negative 40 plus negative 50, my signs are the same. I'm going to add the numbers. 40 plus 50 gives me 90, and I'm going to keep the sign. A negative plus a negative is a negative 90. I'm going to do the same thing with my two positives. 50 plus 75, the signs are the same. We get to add those numbers. 50 plus 75 is 125. And since they're both positive, my answer is positive. So now I need to combine those two answers. So we're looking here now. So negative 90 plus 125. Now my signs are different. And when my signs are different, we really subtract the numbers. So I'm going to line them up vertically to make it easier to subtract, starting with the bigger number, 125 minus 90. 5 minus 0 is 5. I need to borrow from the 1 so that I can subtract. 12 minus 9 is 3. I've got 35 as my answer. And now I've got to decide Is it a positive 35 or is it a negative 35? So now we're going to talk about their absolute values. The absolute value of 90 is 90. The absolute value of 125 is 125. Since 125 is greater than 90, our answer is going to take that sign, which was positive. Therefore, my answer is positive 35. All right, so I used the terms that had the same sign first, and then I combined my two answers. I'm going to ask you again to pause the video, see if you can do the on your own problems 4 through 7, and then push play to check your work. I'm going to read number 7 for you. It says, in example 3, the deposit amounts are $30 and $40. Find the change C in the account balance. So when you're doing that, you're changing from the original deposits up here in the chart from 50 and 75. They are now 30 and 40. So please pause the video and do those problems on your own. So in number 4, when we look at it, I'm adding two numbers with different signs. So I'm going to follow the rule for different signs. When my signs are different, I really subtract. So I'm going to do 11 minus 2 equals 9, and then I have to check for what my sign should be. The absolute value of negative 2 is 2. The absolute value of 11 is 11. Since 11 is greater than 2, my sign should be the sign of the 11, which is positive. Your answer should have been positive 9. In number 5, again, we're adding with different signs. Therefore, we're really subtracting. So we're going to do 10 minus 9, which is 1, and then we're going to check for our sign. The absolute value of 9 is 9. The absolute value of negative 10 is 10. Since 10 is greater than 9, we're going to take the sign of 10, which is negative. Therefore, our answer is negative 1. And in number 6, I'm adding two numbers that are opposites. Therefore, the property of additive inverse applies, and your answer should be 0. In question 7, we have a withdrawal of negative 40 still. Our new deposit amounts plus 30 plus 40, and then our withdrawal from the box was minus negative 50, sorry. So plus negative 50, and I'm going to put that in parentheses to separate my addition sign and my negative sign. So again, the best way I feel like this would be to add the ones with the same sign, so my negatives and my negatives, and then my two positives. So negative 40 plus negative 50 have the same sign. We add the numbers. 40 plus 50 is 90, and keep the sign, which would be negative. And then my positive guys, I've got 30 plus 40. Same sign, add them and keep the sign. That gives me a positive 70. And now I have to combine those two. So we're looking at negative 90 plus 70. And when I go to do negative 90 plus 70, since my signs are different, I'm really subtracting. 90 minus 70 is 20. Now I'm going to check my absolute value. The absolute value of negative 90 is 90. The absolute value of 70 is 70. Since 90 is greater than 70, I'm going to take the sign of 90, which was negative. Therefore, my answer should be negative 20. The other way we could have done that, you may have noticed that negative 40 and positive 40 are additive inverses, and therefore they cancel out to 0, right? Because negative 40 plus 40 would be 0. That would leave us with just 30 plus negative 50. My signs are different, therefore I subtract. 50 minus 30 is 20. Check my absolute value. The absolute value of 30 is 30. The absolute value of negative 50 is 50. Since 50 is greater than 30, we take that negative sign, and notice that that also gives us the same answer. That one would be a quicker way of doing it as well.